What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of SEC State of Mind, presented by FanDuel. I'm your host, Taylor Davis, joined as always by Jason Campbell. And we are pumped to welcome in a guest for this week. We need all the opinions to talk college ball because apparently it's been flipped on its head a little bit this week. So we are so excited to be joined by the host of Yahoo Sports Daily. Caroline Fenton joins us. Caroline, man, week 0 and no shortage of some drama already happening and already upon us. You did mention the trigger words this week, which is the temporary restraining order. It has really taken the college football, really just the football world by storm, because it does indirectly, I guess, implicate the NFL as well. And so obviously the conversation has been surrounding the eligibility of former, I guess, NFL players, guys that have been participating this summer. And Daquan Wright is obviously the biggest name and has pending waiver processing. Will have a deal to participate about a week from now in the Battle of the Tigers when Clemson heads to Baton Rouge. But this is opening a bigger conversation surrounding the current legislation or lack thereof around college football, the governing bodies or lack thereof, the authoritative structure, who actually holds power. I've been refreshing Pete Thamel's Twitter all day long for these updates, and one just came down a few minutes ago regarding penalties around Big Ten coaches, because the Big Ten has officially passed the rule that bans any sort of NFL players returning to college football. This is now becoming a conference by conference matter because judges are basically holding the reins right now. So what is kind of your understanding as things sit right now here on Tuesday, August 25th, specifically around the SEC? Greg Sankey did put out a statement. A lot of people felt it was a bit empty because what action is behind the words at this point? Meanwhile, the Big Ten kind of put their money where their mouth was pretty quickly. But as things sit right now, where do you think this impacts the SEC in specificity?
First of all, Ross Dellinger, Pete Thamel, drop the Venmos. We owe you coffee money because they've been working overtime the last few days. So yeah, Starbucks or whatever is your coffee of choice on me. Next cup that you need. Totally. I think this makes the SEC look really bad. And we've had these conversations about the SEC kind of losing their grip in the hierarchy of college football. You know, the Big Ten winning the last 3 championships. The SEC not even being represented in those national championship games over the last 3 years. The SEC has kind of lost its stronghold on the football field. But it had kind of been the 2 powers in college football, and the 2 decision makers were Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey, the Big Ten in the SEC. Those are still the 2 powers of college football. But we're seeing a wide difference here in the Big Ten coming out and drawing a very definitive line in the sand and saying, you will not do this. And here is exactly the punishments that you will face and the disciplinary action that we will take if you do in fact cross that line. Mm-hmm. Now, the other side of that is, players can still challenge this in court.
Yes.
It can still sue the Big Ten. This isn't going away any time soon. The court of law still supersedes the law of the Big Ten and the SEC, but at least the Big Ten is coming out and saying something about it. And if they want to challenge it in court, they can fight it in court. And look, they might lose, but at least they came out and actually had a stance on it. Greg Sankey and the SEC's official statement that came out on Monday night was just kind of like, hey, we don't want you guys to do this, and we need Congress to get involved. And it was like, okay, and so what? That didn't stop Lane Kiffin from continuing to pursue Daquan Wright, the tight end that you mentioned, who was just playing for the Cleveland Browns. That didn't stop Jack Pyburn, who had 2 sacks in an NFL preseason game last week, from continuing to fight this. So I think that this makes the SEC look like they don't have this strong leadership. Look, we all know Greg Sankey. We know he's an expert businessman. We know he is great and has the future of the SEC in mind, but it looks like the leadership isn't as strong in the SEC as it is in the Big Ten. Now you're seeing the ACC, the Big 12, the SEC itself follow suit, and we've seen the leadership and the decision makers in those respective conferences say that they're going to come out and put together their own statement and come and put their own kind of rules and regulations together. But that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the first first domino from the Big Ten. So I don't know if this necessarily stops legal action, but what it at least does is show everyone, hey, we are united against this, and here is XYZ, and very clean and very obvious and plain print what we would do about it if it does come to the forefront of an issue for these respective conferences.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about, you're exactly right. When it comes to all of this, when I always say this to Taylor, I say when money is involved, everyone is going to try to find every edge or corner to beat the system. Yeah. So you have to see things like this coming. And before times, you never saw anyone before NIL or any of this, you never saw anyone try to come back from the NFL, the NBA, or the G League or anything to try to play collegiate sports. Now, all of a sudden, you can come back and you're trying to fight back because why? You're trying to get as much of a payday before your career is over to try to earn as much as you can. Mm-hmm. There needs to be rules and regulations on this from a standpoint of, if I'm a parent and I got a kid that's in college, and this is the part that hurts everything, is on each roster, there's a certain number of people that can be on your roster. And there's a certain number of people that can travel to away games. At home, you can dress as many as you want. But on the road, you can only take so many. And then there's only so many that can be on scholarship. And there's only so many that can receive revenue share. Not every player can receive revenue share. So when you do this, who's going to sit down and have a conversation with the kid that's been there all spring working out, all summer working out, and all of a sudden here comes Daquan, all of a sudden here comes David Harris and other guys that's been in this restraining order. You got to cut somebody. So some kid is either losing a scholarship or losing, an opportunity that they was getting ready to gear up for the season next week. And now all of a sudden they got to take a step backwards. That's not an easy conversation that you have to have. And now what you've done is said, okay, Hard Knocks, you might well go follow college football now, because guys are getting cut right before the season started if this rule doesn't hold up to the point that you can't be in the NFL or NBA player and come back and play collegiate sports. So it's so much that's got to be going, that has to take place. There's, like you just said a while ago, it's going to get held up in court. Yeah. And this is not going to happen until after the season is over with. So any kid that's in the system now that's going back to these teams, by the time they fight it and figure out what's going to happen, they're going to be towards the end of the year. So it has to be some stipulations and things going on to this. And I know you went to LSU, and I know you're probably like, why does LSU always end up in these conversations?
It's always my team.
Well, you got Lane Kiffin. So, there's going to be some noise there. But I will say this. The guys that went in the portal were the guys that he coached last year when he was at Ole Miss. And it's unfortunate that now they went into the system, and now they want to come to follow him to LSU. So you heard one of the guys say it was a business decision for them. So they're telling you like, hey, this is the opportunity for me to go earn some more and then try to see if I can have a better season than I did a year ago. And if I can go through the draft even higher the next year. So it's just like you're playing life in rewind, and you typically don't do that. Like, you have to learn how to pick up and move forward. And it just seemed like we're rewinding the tracks. That's just like if a kid was to go to college out of high school for spring ball, and all of a sudden he goes back and plays in high school ball before the season starts, he's going to be a leg up better because he just went against college players. So it's just a difference. I don't agree with allowing guys to come back. I think once you move on, you had your time. It's time for somebody else.
I think I'm morally mixed with this, because I think we can all agree. If you were wearing an NFL uniform and playing in an NFL game last week, your time in college is done, right? Mm-hmm. You've moved on. And if it doesn't work out in the NFL, sorry, you will continue down the same path that thousands of people have in the past before. And if it doesn't work out in the NFL, then you go on and you do something differently. It's gross that we have players that have played professionally that are going to play in college football. We saw it in basketball as well. Charles Bediako, he had a contract in the NBA, then came back and played a handful of games at Alabama. It's gross. It feels icky. It feels wrong. I feel that way about my alma mater as the same way that I feel about any other team in college sports. I don't blame the players, because I look at Daquan Wright had a $25,000 signing bonus with the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah.
I don't know what he was making in his NIL deal. I'm going to venture to guess it was more than $25,000. So if you have an opportunity to go play meaningful football and make a lot of money doing it, I think any of us would take that opportunity. So I don't blame them. Frankly, I don't really blame the coaches. And that is Lane Kiffin. That's any other coach. I talked to Joey McGuire yesterday, the Texas Tech head coach, and he said, look, my obligation is not to the sanctity of college football. My obligation is to winning games for Texas Tech. Same thing with Lane Kiffin at LSU. If you can find a competitive advantage anywhere where it might exist, well, you're going to take that. You're going to exercise that. So I don't blame them. But what I do blame is the powers that be. I blame the NCAA for passing this 5-for-5 rule and not thinking of 2022 and how this might backfire and not thinking proactively of what could come up, and instead of thinking reactively. And now we have this mess in front of us that we are a few days removed from kickoff in week 0, and we still have players that don't know if they're going to be playing in college and don't know if they're going to be on NFL rosters. I blame the decision makers. I blame the NCAA, and we can hold the coaches accountable as much as we want, but let's put ourselves in their shoes. Lane Kiffin was hired on the hot seat. If Lane Kiffin doesn't get to the college football playoff, you're going to start hearing alarm bells everywhere. He's going to be the choke of college football. So I don't blame Lane Kiffin for saying, hey, you know what? I need some tight end depth. Let's go get one from the Cleveland Browns.
I'm so glad that you brought that point up, because I feel like it's getting lost in translation, and everyone so quickly wants to talk about upholding the integrity of college football. And believe me, I beat that drum every time I get the opportunity to. I feel like we've lost the plot a lot in this world of college football. However, given where we are right now and the way in which things are progressing, you can't expect these people to be some moral standard that is not being consistently upheld across the board. When you are given an opportunity to do your best job, and there are you're not breaking any rules right now. In fact, a judge actually went out of their way to say, this is in the rules. You're okay. This is in line. Like, I feel the same way about this as I do when we ask coaches their opinions on an expanded playoff. Quite frankly, I don't care what you think about an expanded playoff, because it behooves you to have more spots out there because your job's on the line. It's a very similar conversation that we're having right now. Of course, Lane Kiffin is going to exploit that as best he can. Of course, Daquan Wright is going to take the best opportunity that he can. People just love to latch onto it because Lane takes to the villain role like a fish to water. So that's the reason that this feels a bit more dramatic than it really is. The problem is they swung and missed when they changed this eligibility rule by that little caveat. There was a loophole there for the taking. That is the problem in all of this. And now the issue becomes, how much weight can the conferences hold in this? I love that the Big Ten went head first into this thing and handled it publicly and quickly. I do expect that we are going to hear things from the SEC this week, and the ACC and the Big 12 as well. This thing is not just going to go away. I will be surprised if Daquan Wright is suited up and playing next week. It could happen, but I will be surprised. I think there's more news to come out, but it's only a matter of time before another lawsuit emerges because of it. So I think that this is going to be a narrative this season. And if this doesn't expedite change, I don't know what will. I really feels like every time I think we're at the biggest crossroads in college football, another one comes up. But the players and coaches are not the ones at fault here. I mean, speaking from the SEC landscape point, which I think you made early, and it is a good one, the narrative that then starts coming into play that the SEC is looking for any sort of advantage and they don't care that the Big Ten doesn't want to play ball in this regard. They're trying to get back on the mountaintop. Do you think this does more harm than good? Even if you do beef up your roster and you can win more games, is it at the cost of respect at this point?
Go ahead, Caroline. No, go ahead, Caroline.
Probably.
Yeah.
But I think it's less about if players actually do suit up for LSU or wherever. Obviously, LSU has been at the top of mind and has been at the top of the headlines. I think it more so looks bad on the SEC that they didn't, draw that same line in the sand. They didn't put their foot down. There's nothing that the SEC can do about sympathetic judges in the state of Louisiana or in the state of Texas or in the state of Florida or the state of Alabama. If there's a judge that rules in your favor, then that judge rules in your favor. But
Right.
there's a very interesting point that I saw brought up on social media, and I apologize, I don't remember who it was. But it was, how can the judges rule against this, or the NCAA rule against this, the conferences rule against these TROs, but not the previous ones.
Right.
Trinidad Chambliss is playing on a temporary restraining order. So
Yeah.
if, let's say, Daquan Wright is ineligible with his temporary restraining order, well, what does that mean for Trinidad Chambliss? And frankly, the SEC is better when Trinidad Chambliss is quarterbacking in it. Ole Miss is a more fun story when Trinidad Chambliss can play. It's not like I don't want his eligibility to be taken away, or any of these other players that were granted extra years of eligibility. I just don't know how, if you want to look at it from a court of law perspective, which we all deserve honorary law degrees, let me just say.
How about that?
Covering this sport. I mean, I feel like Elle Woods up in here. How in the court of law can you look at it and say, this one person is not allowed to play under this jurisdiction, but this other player can play under the exact same logic and principle and laws? That doesn't make sense to me. So I do think that it would look bad. It would be kind of a knock on the respect of the SEC, but let's all not forget, if the SEC wins a national championship this year, whether it's Texas or Georgia or Texas A&M, nobody's going to care. Nobody is going to care. And it looks really bad if the SEC, quote unquote, breaks the rules, which it's not really breaking the rules, but does something that no other conference is willing to do, and still doesn't get to a national championship.
Exactly.
I say this, and both of you are completely correct in everything that you're saying. And my whole thing is, the NCAA comes out and make a decision, and then the state judge goes and make another decision. Then it's upheld by the state. So what's the NCAA even involvement? Like, what's the purpose, at that point? So, but then the biggest thing is, if I'm a coach, like I said, it's not the coach's fault. It's not the player's fault. It's the system, right? So everyone's always trying to find a competitive edge within the system. Mm-hmm. So you have to fix the system first. But also, if you're a coach and you do make these moves, I think it adds more pressure on the coach, because now people are going to say, well, you have X, Y, and Z on your team. So now your expectation just went up a little bit more, where some coaches may be scared to touch it because they don't want that added pressure. So you have to give Lane a little bit of credit here, that he knows, like you said, he's under a lot of lenses this year anyways, to go out and compete and to make the playoffs. And when you saw the preseason rankings and everything come out, I was shocked that LSU wasn't picked in the top 6 to finish within the playoffs. I was shocked that they wasn't picked in within the top 10 for preseason rankings. So either somebody knows something that we don't, but if you look at the roster that they accumulated, you would think so, right? But when you go and add these guys, but the other element to this is your locker room. Your locker room has to receive this, because this can go one or two ways. It may can help your locker room if there are two veteran guys that know how to come in and not be a rah-rah guy with poking their chests out and can communicate with the rest of their teammates. Or if they come in that locker room and they feel like they're untouchable, or if they come in there and they jump in front of two kids that's been fighting for a position and all of a sudden they become the guy, what did that do to your locker room? Because your locker room has to accept this, because football is all about consistency. It's all about, camaraderie. It's all about being together. So does this bring your team together more, or this going to be a hiccup the first time something doesn't go right? They're going to say this, because you have to be careful. Your locker room can be very fragile as your season is upon you within 1 week.
And I think important to point out too, just with this specific example of Daquan Wright, if he steps into LSU's locker room, if for whatever reason he is eligible to play in college football, he's not the best tight end in that tight end room. Mm-hmm. LSU might have the best tight end in the country in Trados Green, a 6'7" monster who was a massive part of their offense last year, and I expect him to be an even bigger part of it this year when the offense can actually move the football. But this is really just kind of like a depth move for Lane Kiffin. He's just bringing in Daquan Wright for depth at the tight end position, Xavier Harris for depth on the defensive line. So there's kind of two ways to look at it. One way you could look at it, if you want to be kind of sympathetic toward Lane and kind of pro LSU, you could say, well, it's just depth pieces. It's not that big of a deal. you could look at it from the other side and say, is the juice really worth the squeeze?
Right.
Is it really worth being the
Caroline,
villains
go
of
ahead and go a
college
little deeper.
football?
Go ahead and go a little deeper. Go ahead and say he don't want them to go back to Ole Miss.
He did say, he said if they're not going to come play for me, they're going to go play for somebody else. So maybe it's just hoarding talent so they stay in Louisiana and don't go elsewhere. If you're not, you just play with us so I don't have to play against you.
Yeah.
That's an element of it as well. So it's almost like we're having all of this outrage for a backup tight end and a backup defensive lineman. But I do get it. I don't want to make light of it because it is a very it's a critical moment in college football. And Taylor, you mentioned it earlier. It just feels like every day, every week, every month, every season, it's just something new. And it's leading me more and more to the position of none of this will be solved, and we'll continue to have some of these loopholes and hiccups pop up every single year if we don't collectively bargain. We are heading toward unionizing in college football and a collective bargaining agreement. And sure, yes, that does open up its own kind of can of worms. Can you be in a union without being employees? So are players now employees of the university? If they're employees of the university, then aren't they entitled to health insurance? Don't they get certain employee? Exactly.
Yes.
So those are major questions that have to be asked. But it just seems like a CBA, while it would come with a lot of question marks and a lot of problems and a lot of hiccups, it would also answer a lot of the problems and questions that are seemingly coming up every single day in college football.
Completely agree. It's definitely going to be something the universities are trying to avoid as much as possible, but it really feels like that's the only way that we're going to get any sort of resolve. And for all intents and purposes, they are employees right now. So it just is a matter of time. But I also think an interesting piece of this is, are they going to require a full season commitment? Because what if several injuries happen in the league and someone calls Daquan Wright and says, hey, we need you we need you back. You know what I mean? Like there's so many loopholes. Well, then now LSU loses a spot that they had already kicked a guy off for. So there's so much to this that I think is yet to unfold, and it just continues to get stickier and stickier. And yes, it's not just LSU. I mean, running back TJ Harden is in talks with 2 SEC schools that are not LSU. So this is not just a Baton Rouge issue, even though they have fully leaned into the villain mantra, like I said. Well, Caroline, before we let you go, I got to get your take on the SEC as it stands right now, sans all the pending drama that could unfold with these NFL guys, right? Obviously, a lot of expectations around Texas and Georgia, some question marks around teams like Tennessee and Missouri, and a lot happening there in the middle. Who do you have the most confidence in as we are just a few days away from college football?
You just mentioned it. It feels like it's Texas and Georgia, and then it's kind of everybody else. They are alone in that first tier in the SEC, in my opinion. There's so much trust that you can have in retaining coordinators and retaining quarterbacks and retaining coaches. Georgia is going to be, I would say, the default team that I would trust the most, because why would I have any reason to not trust Georgia?
Totally.
They're the youngest team in college football this year. They have an average age of like 19 and a half, which is crazy in a year of college football, or the era of college football. We're seeing a 24, 25-year-old player is not out of the ordinary. So that is going to be a big question mark. Can Gunnar Stockton stay more consistent? We saw some really good things from Gunnar Stockton last year, late in the Tennessee game, in the SEC championship game. But against Georgia Tech, he really struggled with accuracy. He really struggled with some of the pressure that Brent Key was dialing up. So those are some question marks I have there. Obviously, Texas invested $50 million into that roster. They bring in a guy that you all are so familiar with in Cam Coleman. He has a whole arsenal of weapons to throw to, and you have a quarterback with the last name Manning. I mean, the Texas expectations aren't going anywhere, and for very good reason. I actually think that Sark is going into the hot seat in this season, because if you spend a collective $100 million in 2 years on a roster, and you have a quarterback with the last name Manning, and you don't make the college football playoff in either of his 2 years as a starter, that's an indictment on you, on the coaching staff. So I think I trust those two teams the most. But I also see this kind of tier, this cluster of teams that could ascend into that first tier. I just have too many question marks right now as of August 25th. Texas
Agreed.
A&M is in that tier. Love what we saw from Marcel Reed. Do need to see some more consistency. You lose 4 starters on the offensive line. So those are some questions I need answered from A&M before I can kind of bump them up in that first tier. Oklahoma. Why aren't we talking more about Oklahoma? They hosted a playoff game last season. John Mateer, there was a clear pre-John Mateer surgery and post-John Mateer surgery last season. Right. So how healthy is John Mateer? They're going to come and go as John Mateer goes because we know that we can trust in a Brent Venables defense. I'll put Bama in that tier. I know Nick Saban talked a lot about how nobody's talking about Alabama. It's not disrespectful to Alabama. It's just not an overly interesting football team right now.
I agree.
But that is one team that I think I'm still giving them the Alabama benefit of the doubt. And maybe that goes out the wayside at some point here, but I still give them the benefit of the doubt. And look, you see the helmet behind me. I'm taking my purple and gold tinted glasses off, but there's a lot to like about LSU. If Sam Leavitt is healthy, all of the talent they brought in, the continuity defensively with Blake Baker coming back as the defensive coordinator, I'm not putting them in that first year yet because they haven't earned it, but I think they could be one that finds themselves in that elite tier at some point this season.
Caroline, I got 2 for you real quick.
Let's hear it.
So there's 2 big coordinator hires in the SEC this year. And Will Muschamp, the defense coordinator for Texas. Yeah. And then Coach Browse, the offense coordinator for South Carolina. Which one you think has the biggest impact on their team when you talk about the offense coordinator and Browse who can mix it around with Lenore Sellers, or Will Muschamp with a defense that's kind of loaded? Which one, knowing these coaches, which one you think has the biggest impact? And who has been your surprise quarterback announcement as the starter? A couple of guys were named today and yesterday in the SEC. Who's the surprise that you thought, I thought they may not start him just yet?
To answer your first question in terms of the coordinators, I do think it's Will Muschamp at Texas. And I just think it's because Texas is going to be a bigger story because there's more of a spotlight on Texas and because there's more of a microscope on Texas this year. Now, don't get that twisted. South Carolina needs to do more. Shane Beamer needs to deliver more. When you have a quarterback like Lenora Sellers and you're able to keep him in the building for as long as they have, there's definitely pressure on Shane Beamer, but just not as high of expectations. I mean, Will Muschamp is, he's I guess mainstay in the SEC. Will Muschamp has been a household name in this conference for so many years. And I think he has the skins on the wall to be able to say, okay, we have championship expectations and you have championship caliber players. I mean, Colin Simmons is an absolute beast. He led the SEC in tackles last year. So he has a lot to work with, a lot to cook with, but also incredibly high expectations. So I would defer to Will Muschamp there. But in terms of the surprise quarterback announcements, I expected Faison Brandon to be named the starting quarterback at Tennessee. I think we all kind of expected Keelan Russell to be named as the starting quarterback at Alabama. None of those were huge surprises to me. But I think the biggest surprise was the announcement coming out of Vanderbilt. Yep. I mean, you bring in a 5-star who committed to Georgia, decommitted to Georgia to come to Vanderbilt. When has that ever happened in our lifetimes that a 5-star decommits from Georgia and heads to Vanderbilt? But instead, you defer to the guy who's a little bit older, who has a little bit more experience. And I apologize, his name's escaping me. It's because I haven't even really thought about him in the quarterback conversation. I don't think that that's necessarily an indictment on Vanderbilt. I don't think that that's wrong decision-making on behalf of Clark Lee. I think that just goes to show that, look, as a true freshman, you're just not ready for the grind of the SEC at this point. So there's nothing wrong with letting a young quarterback sit on the bench, learn from the incumbent, let him cook a little bit, bring him along slowly. But that was a surprise to me and was a surprise to a lot of people who cover the Vanderbilt football program on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's Blaise Berlowitz is his name, and he was with...
It was an awesome name.
Yeah, I know, right? It sounds like a quarterback, but he was at New Mexico State. He was Diego Pavia's backup for 3 years, two at Vandy and 1 at New Mexico State. Knows Tim Beck's offensive system. So being here in Nashville, I had actually been getting rumblings that it was probably going to be Blaise, that Jared Curtis was just a little bit behind, has all the makings, and I fully expect we're going to see him game 1 against Austin Peay. Keep in mind, the beginning of Vanderbilt's schedule allows for a little bit of flexibility there. You've got Austin Peay, Delaware, and NC State to start season. Let them get both of those guys under their belt, alleviate a little bit of the pressure on Jared Curtis as the big hometown 5-star kid that flipped from Georgia. Let us get his feet under him a little bit, get a better understanding of the offense, especially under a guy like Berlowitz, who's been living it for the past 3 years. So, well, Caroline, please tell our listeners where they can find you, follow along, as we will all be boots on the ground with football season just a few days away.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton 1. I host Yahoo Sports Daily every morning from 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern time. So you can catch me talking ball there. And then I'm also on SiriusXM College, and just get ready for the start of the season.
Amazing. It is upon us, crazy as it may seem. Caroline, thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it. Enjoy football season. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. As always, make sure you subscribe, follow us along. SEC State of Mind, week 1 next week. We'll get you ready with all our game previews. For J Cam, I'm Taylor Davis. We'll see ya.
Peace.